Good afternoon from the sacred space at Titania's realm. My laptop blipped me off for no apparent reason, but it was perfect timing because shortly after, one of my little mummies that looks after me, my neighbour down the road, brought me 3 rolls of toilet paper to tide me over for the next few days with the storm. Isn't that gorgeous? And Mama T, as per usual, is blessed and provided for and looked after. And thank you to the multiverse and thank you to Margot. So we're all feeling a bit nervous about what's going to happen and how bad it's going to be, but I'm sure we'll all be fine. So, let me continue with the story. I can't remember exactly where they cut us off now. They being my laptop genie, my genie laptop. It's a magical creature, this laptop. It does what it wants, whatever. But anyway, where were we? Right. But at that instant, the sun touched the western sea. A strange rumbling quake spread over the waters and came across the lands, and above it a darkness full of lightnings. Sparrow checked his flight and hovered in mid-air, amazed to see the forest swirling like water. Then he saw God clutch his doorpost, while his tower swayed like a palm tree. That was the last thing Sparrow saw before the blackness snatched him up. Then he was whirling in a blackness. All round him he could hear birds crying and screeching, the fright cries of the birds. He was no longer trying to fly. He folded his wings tightly and tucked up his feet and squeezed his head down between his shoulders and peered out over his eyelids. Now and again a feathery body struck him. He knew he was whirling in a cloud of birds, a big bag full of birds. Were they all in a sack? Were they all being carried off in a great bag? Something God had never heard about, a black hole in space, had lowered its whirling snout to the earth like an elephant's trunk. First it had blown all the birds off their perches and out of their bushes. Then it had sucked them up in one whoosh, a spinning whoosh, like water going out of a plug hole downwards. All the birds of the world were whirling into the black hole upwards. They were being hoovered up. Synchronicity. I was just telling Margot about my experience with the mini tornado in Harvey Bay in 1992, that the wind literally sounded like a hoover sucking backwards. And I just had I was second to say to my mother and husband to get the kids we were staying in a motel on holiday there, get the kids into a back bedroom, and I ran after them just when it hit. But the sound of the wind being sucked backwards with such immense force was terrifying. So luckily there was no damage to our motel and I wasn't hurt, but could have gone very, very badly, especially as I was standing in the window observing the storm at the time. And in a few minutes they were gone, The world was emptied of birds. Who would do such a thing? Empty the world of birds. I love birds. I love all animals, but very fond of birds. God wandered over the hills calling to the birds. Every single one had gone, or so it seemed to God. He just couldn't believe it. Actually, one bird was left, the burrow owl. Two big yellow eyes stared upwards from the bottom of its black burrow. But it wouldn't come out. No, not even to comfort God. It stayed where it was, waiting for the next terrible blast of black wind. God sat on a ridge, his elbows on his knees, clutching the roots of his hair in his hands and watching the tears splash into the dust between his feet as he sobbed. He really felt his heart was broken this time. How could he begin again? How could he ever create a hummingbird again, or a sparrowhawk, or a skylark, or a wren, or a kingfisher, or a snow bunting? As he recited their names, new sobs shook him. The animals gazed at him in fear and went past softly. The worms drew back into their holes. The flies crept under the leaves. And in the lakes, and in the rivers, and in the sea, the fish hung motionless, listening round-eyed, hearing through all the shaking curtains of water the heartbroken sobbing of God. Where are they? He suddenly roared. Who has stolen my birds? But God knew nothing about the black hole, so he never guessed where they might have gone. It was a total mystery. He wandered about stunned. He stopped making things. He lay full length beside the sea, his forearm over his eyes, and he looked as if he died of grief, except that his fists were tightly clenched and tears crept back into his ears, while all over the world the eggs in the nests went cold. It's a particularly comforting story after all, on the eve of a massive big cyclone. Oops! There'll be a lesson in it somewhere. Just bear it out. Bear it out, people. Meanwhile, the birds huddled together in the darkness. Now it had stolen them, the black hole seemed quite satisfied. They seemed to be in some sort of pit. The various owls glared, trying to give a little light with their eyes. But it wasn't the sort of light any other bird could see by. We are in a deep, deep pit, said the snowy owl. Don't you see? It looks pretty hopeless, said the barn owl. They knew they were a vast distance from the world, but they had no idea where. The homing pigeons were baffled. They turned their heads this way and that. Our compasses won't work, they whimpered. We must be somewhere beyond the stars. Hearing this, many of the birds began to cry again. Then, from far above, came a laugh. a long, rippling, eerie laugh. The birds felt their feathers stick up on end and they all went dead silent. "Who's that?" whispered a coot. "Now you're mine, pretty birds. My mother wanted a pretty bird, so now you all belong to my mother." And from high up there, somewhere in the dark, the peculiar laugh came again. The birds would have liked to look at each other. Instead, even though they were huddled together so tightly, they just stared, horrified, into the utter black, each on his own, each by herself. "Sing for my mother?" said the voice then. "Come on, let's have a cheery morning chorus." The birds listened in horror. Suddenly there came a bang and all the birds crashed together in a heap, their ears ringing. The voice seemed to have slapped the pit with its hand and maybe kicked it. "Sing, you brats!" it screeched, and again there came a bang, and again they all turned somersaults and landed on top of each other. "Are you going to sing?" came the screech. Then the crow, very quick, shouted in his worst voice, "You've broken our voices, you big idiot. Just listen. You've broken our glottals." Hearing the crow, the black hole thought it was true. It had broken their voices. It didn't know anything about birds. It howled a great curse up in the black and fell silent. What next? What was it thinking now? All the birds waited for it to play its next dreadful trick. And in the silence, very quietly at first, the birds began to cry again. It was in this crying that Sparrow heard his wife. He pushed through the crush and found her. They put their wings around each other and sat there in the dark. "If only God knew," whispered his wife, "surely he'd help us." But God did not know. God lay in the world beside the booming surf, and his mind too was simply one big blackness. Quite soon the birds began to feel hungry. The sparrow undid his knapsack and shared his seeds. He worked his way among the tightly packed birds and asked each one, "Can you eat seeds?" And in the pitch dark the birds would answer. Sparrow gave one seed to each seed eater. He couldn't help the insect eaters and the grub eaters, such as the wrens and the woodpeckers. Once, coming up against a very horny, unbird-like body, he asked, "Do you eat seeds?" And a voice from far above his head replied, in a deep drum-like rumble, "I am the monkey-eating eagle." Sparrow realized he was leaning on the eagle's ankle and he got clear fast. He knew this couldn't go on for very long. Pretty soon the eagles and owls and hawks and gulls would begin to eat the others. If they were all to get back to Earth, it would have to be quick. Otherwise, he couldn't bear to think about it. It would be awful. It might be happening already. The sly owls with their night sight were probably at it already. snatching up the nearest small bird with such a savage sudden grip there wasn't even a gasp. Sparrow gave out every seed except for two, one for his wife and one for himself. That's it, he whispered to her then. No more seeds. How generous of him was he, though, to share all his seeds with the other seed-eating birds, like my little earth angel Margot sharing her loo paper. And during coronavirus lockdown, the first time that happened to also be on a pension day when I had no money. So I'd run out of loo paper. My friend Lynn brought me toilet paper. So the Holy One, blessed be his name forever and ever, always provides, one way or the other. It's quite miraculous. It's a little thing, but it was a very sweet and thoughtful gift. If there weren't so many greedy people in Australia who were so pissweak and childish and stockpile, necessary resources in a crisis, raid the shops and empty them of everything, there'd be enough for everyone. But they don't think about the poor and the sick and the disenfranchised and the broke. They just take everything, leave the rest of us for dead. So I'm not happy about this, as you can imagine. But I am happy that my beautiful friends looked after me yet again. And in the face of nature's fury, we're all equals actually. So all that greed and corruption, taking resources from others, will not benefit anyone in the long run. And if it does benefit them, they've seeded their souls. Right. That's it, he whispered to her then. No more seeds. Are you sure? She asked. She always wanted to make sure. So she opened his knapsack and stuck her head inside. She pulled her head out quickly and listened. Do you hear the sea? She asked. What? Said her husband. What do you mean, hear the sea? Inside your bag, she said. I hear the sea. Sparrow stuck his head inside the knapsack, and there it was, the strong, crumpling boom of heavy surf falling on a shingly beach. You can tell that the author's English, can't you? Shingly beaches. He listened, amazed. Then he realised it was coming from one corner of the knapsack. He poked down there with his beak and found a seed. One seed. And the sound of the sea was coming from the seed. How can this be, people of Earth? We're about to find out. He brought it out, nipped in his bill. The sound of the surf filled his head. A sudden wild clamour went up from the gulls somewhere in the dark. It's the sea, they cried. The sea! Listen, it's the sea! All the birds shouted excitedly, and the voice of the loon cried above them all. The earth is coming! The earth is looking for us. That's its panting breath as it climbs through space. No, it's just me wheezing with my asthma, but all good, people there. All good. Sparrow, turned his head this way and that. Although the sea sound came out of the seed, he felt it was coming from one direction only. He turned towards the sound, and as he did so, a strange thing happened. He saw the sea, tiny and far off, as if he were looking through the wrong end of a telescope. With the seed in his bill and the sound of the surf in his ears, he saw the long shore and the great slow combers crumbling to whiteness. He took the seed out of his bill and was going to tell his wife to look at the sea, but the moment he took the seed from his bill, everything went dark. And though he could still hear the surf, the sea had vanished. He put the seed back in his bill, and after twisting his head this way and that, he found the sea again. It was just as if his brain was a telescope, but only if he had held the seed in his bill. "I see the sea," he shouted. "I see the earth and the sea." As he shouted, the seed fell from his beak, but he found it again between his wife's toes, because of the noise of the surf coming out of it. He put it back in his beak to make sure it wasn't broken, and this time he saw more. He saw the sea, the surf, and the long beach. And lying along the beach, God. He took the seed in his claw. "I see God," he yelled. All the birds went silent, listening to the sea and hearing Sparrow's words and trying to see something in the perfect blackness. "Come on," cried Sparrow. "Follow me, follow me, follow the sea sound." And he gripped the seed in his bill and flew up, flying towards that vision of the sea and of God lying beside it. It was easy to keep his direction. It was exactly like following a compass. As long as he held the seed, he simply flew towards the bright little picture of God lying beside the surf. And with a dull roar, like another sea, all the birds flew up into the dark and followed him. They couldn't see the picture. And in that blank dark, they couldn't see Sparrow, but they could hear the sea booming out of the seed in Sparrow's bill. So all the birds of the world set off, a rustling, immense cloud, flying through the great darkness of space, following the sound of the surf. Far above, a voice howled, "Come back!" But the birds flew on blindly. Only Sparrow could see anything, and what he saw seemed to be both very far off and inside his head as he held the seed. The rest flew into the pitch dark as if their eyes were closed. "Come back!" screeched the thin, terrible voice again, growing closer. The black hole was coming after them with its sucker. Then it swirled in among them. It was like the nozzle of a vacuum cleaner, whirling about in a dense cloud of flies. The birds felt themselves caught in the whirlwind and snatched away. Soon Sparrow was flying alone. didn't know it. He thought they were all following him. Just need to blow my nose. I need to blow my nose, people. Okay, guys. I see a lantern I've forgotten to take down to do that soon. The cyclone's not due until the early hours of Friday morning, so I have time. I must remember because I'll forget. Out of sight, out of mind, am I right? I thought I got them in too. Right where were we when I had to blow my nose? Soon Sparrow was flying alone. He didn't know it. He thought they were all following him. He didn't dare take the seed from his bill because he thought he might drop it into empty space. And the sound of the surf in his head made it impossible to hear the little cries of the birds as they were sucked away once again into the black hole. For some reason, the black hole couldn't get a grip on Sparrow. It tore off some of his tail feathers, but as long as he held the seed and kept his eyes on his bright picture, it couldn't suck him in. Finally it coiled up and whipped away with a howl, and Sparrow flew on into a faint growing light like dawn. Now he saw he was alone, but there was nothing he could do about it. Now his only hope was to tell God. He kept going, and the light brightened. And at last, worn out with frayed feathers, he fell onto God's chest, swallowing the seed, and lay panting. Imagine God's joy when he looked down at what had dropped on his chest and found Sparrow. I wish my little bird Charlie was still alive and she could hop on my chest and eyeball me one more time. Sweet little baby that she was. Look, he shouted to his mother. Look, Sparrow, where have you been? She gave Sparrow a drink, and God listened to his tale. As he listened, his frown darkened. And when Sparrow had finished, God stood up. An oversight, he said grimly. That black hole has made its nest in the stars. Once it was only a little dust devil, playing in the ashes of volcanoes. Now it's eating the stars and growing. Yes, that's what must be happening. Something I never expected. Well, we'll soon fix it now we know what it is. And with those words, God leapt upwards. Be careful, shouted his mother. I love in this story that God has a divine feminine, a mother. I think that's a lovely touch. Thank you, Ted Hughes. Acknowledging the divine feminine. Be careful, shouted his mother. But the heavens were already rumbling. A few stars fell in broad daylight. God tied the black hole and its mother into a tight knot and fed them to the constellation of Capricorn. Then he brought the birds home, and they spread out over the world 1,000 times more joyful than before. God nodded and smiled. A very good thing, he said. Some of them used to moan and grumble a lot, but after a spell in the black hole, now they know better. I think we'll all be appreciating each other and life a lot more when this nasty cyclone finally blows through and blows out. Life, L'chaim. Choose life, choose each other. Then he saw Sparrow sitting on the veranda rail of his workshop with his wife beside him. As for you, said God, for you there is a reward. To tell you the truth, Sparrow, I wasn't too sure about you. I thought you had it in you to be a real pest. But you've proved your quality, and this is your reward. Your children shall inherit the whole earth. Then Sparrow put back his head and let out a song of joy, a psalm to God. And his wife too. She lifted her beak and sang out beside him. It sounded the same as ever. A few raspy chirrups, like a Stone Age man trying to strike a spark between two flints and not having much success. But God was pleased. Then Sparrow and his wife flew off back to their hole in the tree in the middle of the forest, from which the singing of all the birds rose like the sound of surf. And here's the little children waiting to be hatched. Blessed be, people of earth. I'm not going to continue on with 2 or 3 or 4 stories today. I'm struggling with my asthma a bit, so I'm going to go and watch some TV while I've still got power and can enjoy blobbing on the couch doing nothing and watching Netflix or Prime, whatever I can find that's interesting, and enjoying each moment and each breath as it comes and as it goes, and being contented and grateful and blessed, and together we will survive this and come out the other side beautiful ones. Bye for now. Take good care. Be of good cheer.